That's right. All right, so welcome everyone to our weekly DAT market update. We're live, as you can see, scattered about the country. I'm Ken Adamo, Chief of Analytics at DAT, joined by the subterranean Ned Damon, Principal Data Scientist, DAT, and Dean Croke, who's joining us as our Principal Industry Analyst and Resident Truck Driver. That's going to come in importance here later in the show. How are you guys doing this week?
Fantastic, Ken.
Could be better. Could be better. Fires are raging through Oregon right now, and nobody, at least in the Portland area, ought to be going outside. So having a 4-year-old in the house 24/7 is, and my mom is making for fun times.
Fun times, yeah. And I'm streaming this from my phone's hotspot. We're having some construction-related issues. So if any of us drop off, as I mentioned earlier, if you missed out when we just got started, you may see us disappear and come back online, but we're going to try our best to carry everything on through. So I'm going to jump straight into our key points of the week because we have some really interesting stuff going on this week that we'd like to talk about. So spot rates inching higher. I think Ned said surprisingly linear a week or two ago, and I think that's holding true. We're sitting now at about a 5-year high. Contract rates are also up a little bit, but there's still this wide gap where spot is currently higher than contract at the national level. We definitely see that exacerbated in certain markets, but not in all markets. We have quite a bit of volatility out there. As we mentioned earlier in the show, we have wildfires raging in California and in Oregon. We have Hurricane Sally heading towards the southeast Gulf Coast. And then just the general COVID-related issues nationally. And I think most importantly for this week, it's National Truck Driver Appreciation Week. So we want to make sure we start and end the show with thanking a trucker, and we're going to have a lot of interesting content focused on National Truck Driver Appreciation Week later in the show. So with that, I will again turn it over to our resident truck driver and principal industry analyst, Dean, to go through our market update.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Fascinating week this week from a data perspective, although it was a short work week, which tends to distort some of the data points we look at, given a lot of people took time off and some extended the work week with vacation all week. On the dry van load to truck ratio, as a result of load postings dropping about 20% due to the Labor Day short work week, the load to truck ratio dropped about 10% to 5.26. We noticed a bunch of carriers taking time off also, which is, again, not unusual, about 10% fewer load searches last week as a result of the short work week. On the reefer side, very similar story. LTR dropped about 12% and about 17% fewer load posts overall, and about 5% fewer trucks searching for loads. So, again, same story as dry van. Flatbed, a little bit different. There were more trucks off the road last week in the flatbed sector. If we look at the number of trucks searching for loads, that was down about 14%. But similar story for all three equipment types. Trucks took time out, drivers took time at home, and our broker network certainly wasn't posting as many loads. A lot of that volume from last week gets picked up in the week prior. It's a pretty busy week prior to Labor Day, so we see a little bit more volume in that week typically. Moving on to the market condition index for dry van, been a lot of talk about capacity decreasing, increasing in certain sectors. A couple of data points of interest. The recent Logistics Managers Index pushed out by the University of Phoenix shows that capacity has tightened significantly. They report one of the second fastest contraction in their index since it started. So there's certainly been a change in capacity. What they did note was it's been much tighter for upstream e-commerce supply chain distribution firms, as opposed to capacity in the customer-facing downstream firms. A little bit of interest on the West Coast. Freight volumes started to cool. In particular in Los Angeles, volumes are down about 26% week over week. We think this is interesting to watch because even though it's a short week, imports are less affected by the Labor Day week from a trucking perspective than most other metrics we'd watch. I took a look at all of our major leading ports, import ports such as Elizabeth, New Jersey, Savannah, Houston, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco. When I add those up, when I look at the volumes last week, load post volumes are down about 21% week over week. So could be a sign of imports have peaked as reported by Journal of Commerce last week, and we might be seeing a slowdown. We'll be sort of watching that data point anxiously next week. On the refrigerated side, a lot of activity still in the Pacific Northwest. We're well into the fall harvest season now for lots of fall crops, potatoes, onions, pears, peaches. About 87% of the US commercial pear crop comes from Washington and Oregon. It pushes out a staggering amount of freight, about 16,000 truckloads between mid-August and October. Volumes are up about 26% month over month out of that region. So the Pacific Northwest for refrigerated carriers remains very strong. The other market that popped up last week, which was interesting, the Denver market, rates into Denver are still pretty high. It showed a 4% week over week increase in outbound volume. It's still a heavy backhaul market, although volumes have been increasing, which is good news for carriers and brokers. Rates are still pretty low at $1.37 a mile, which is sort of still in that deep backhaul territory. On the flatbed side, building and construction sort of is still continuing along about the same rate. New home starts in the southeast are driving a lot of activities. You can see on the map there. The drilling activity we reported on last week is still strong in the Albuquerque and Permian Basin markets. On the East Coast, I noticed something very interesting this week from the post-pandemic levels in the port of Baltimore, which is the biggest roll-on, roll-off port market on the East Coast. That's where a lot of machinery comes in and goes out. Tonnage in the Port of Baltimore was up 14% in July, which is a great sign for flatbed carriers, especially drop deck and specialised. If we drill into our data in the Baltimore market, those volumes are up about 4%. Capacity is still pretty loose though on the East Coast, so rates haven't moved up as much. But that's great news for carriers on the East Coast who rely on a lot of freight out of the Baltimore, Maryland market. If I switch over now to the next chart, which is our spot rate index, I wanted to show you some interesting data here. Spot rates continue to climb. They spiked on Labor Day as they normally do, and then kind of flattened out the rest of the week. They ended up at about $2.19 a mile. That represented a 3% increase. That's about 29% higher than this time last year. The rate rally continues. It's now entering its 20th week after bottoming it out at $1.32 a mile. On the reefer side, spot market rates are up around $2.37 a mile. It's the highest level in the last 5 years for the second week of September. And we're just 4 cents a mile off the highest recorded level in 2018, which was $2.41 a mile. Closing out with the flatbed spot rate view, those rates ended at about $2.15 a mile. But unlike 2018, when rates were cooling off in September, this year rates have been steadily climbing this time of the year. Normally we see flatbed rates start to taper off. This time they're starting to, or continuing up past that 2018 level, as you can see there. Since the bottom, this is interesting for flatbed carriers, since the bottom of the market on April 1, flatbed rates have increased about 55 cents a mile. So that's good news for flatbed carriers. And the latest industrial production index that came out this morning shows that there's been some slight growth in the manufacturing sector in August, which is again good news for flatbed carriers. So that's the rate update on for the year-over-year view. Ken, what's it look like now on the forecast side?
Before we hop into the forecast, I just wanted to try something on for size with you guys. Typically, we've talked a lot about price ceilings, right, and saturation points as price goes up. One of the things I've been noodling on and thinking about is with the time to time to when it's on the shelf, right? So when the time the product in the back of the truck, it's kind of getting sold through much faster than typical, right? They're not warehousing it; they're kind of direct from the dock being sold. I've seen things in shipping cartons out on big box retailers. Do you think that will sort of mitigate some of that price ceiling pressure and it'll allow rates to continue to rise, or do you think shippers will still start to take action to mitigate some of the higher prices as we head into the fall?
It's interesting. I sense, and I talked to a lot of drivers in my contact network, I sense that we've kind of reached this peak, this dislocation in the market, this panic buying. I saw something last week was interesting. We saw this real choke point in the e-commerce space where the large retailers were more focused on outbound next day deliveries as opposed to unloading trailers. So the capacity shortage on the inbound side was kind of causing a lot of backups throughout the market. I think that capacity tightness that we've been seeing in the e-commerce side starts to back off, starts to ease. My sense is that I think we've reached the peak in retail volume. We're 4 weeks away from Halloween, another 4 weeks to Thanksgiving. I get a feeling that the demand side will start to slow down and decrease some of that upward rate pressure that we've been seeing, Ken.
It'll be interesting. I mean, typically it's like an M, right? Around Halloween, we see that first hump, and then right before Black Friday, we see the second one.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. I know FedEx just announced they're adding 70,000 seasonal this fall.
Right. I think Amazon said 100,000 in this week's update. New
wild stuff.
Yeah.
Well, hey, without further ado, let's get over to Ned in the forecast because there's some really interesting stuff over there.
I think it's an interesting week for forecast. So we're going to start off by looking at our dry van forecast. So in the blue, we have our historical rates observed by DAT. And then off to the right, we have our forecast models. We have the ratecast model in green. We have that short-term model in red. And then we have two blended forecasts that are mixtures of the short-term and the ratecast model in different ways and in different proportions in gold and gray. For this forecast, the short-term model is starting to slow down a little bit. I think that's because it's getting close to that price ceiling that I've been expecting, but we'll see what happens there. The ratecast model is expecting more of a level off that Dean was talking about, that moving into that M shape as we're getting towards Halloween. But given how up and to the right, how just surprisingly linear, to use the words that Ken used this at the start of the show, things have been. I'm hesitant to work against that short-term model. Moving forward to the reefer rate. The agreement early, that suggests to me that they're all kind of seeing the same dynamics. I keep hoping that there's going to be some kind of a pressure that's going to turn rates around, because I feel like this amount of up and to the right is a sign of profound dislocation and unhealthiness in the market. But things will keep going until they stop, and so I'm not sure.
All right, I think we're having some trouble with Ned from his subterranean fire layer. So I'm going to go back because I think there was some choppiness. I'll go back and cover reefers real quick. I think a lot of what Ned talked about here holds true with reefers as well. We start to see the green line, which is the ratecast flagship model, really want to assert seasonality as we head into the fall. What you'll typically see with reefer seasonality is a bit of a trough right now, and then the build up leading in towards Christmas time. But the short-term model that's essentially seen nothing but a rally since late April, early May, continues to want to go up and to the right. We're tinkering with these saturation points. And when we say saturation point, what we mean is it's not a hard ceiling. I mean, that's not what we are seeking to do with this model. We're just saying at a certain point, the rate increase saturates to a point where it's not going to push above. It's like it's harder. It becomes tougher sledding the higher rates get and approach a saturation point. I'm going to move to flatbed really quick. There seems to be more model agreement here, at least through the end of the month. You can see through about September 26th, all the models are on top of each other. But again, the short-term model continues to want to push. And if you go back to what Dean was showing, we're reaching kind of an intersection between 2018 and this year, where rates were falling then, rates are rising now. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens as we push into October with flatbeds. We know that a busy hurricane season, there's going to be a lot of demand for rebuilding. Hopefully not, but it's kind of what we're kind of coming to terms with at the moment. With the wildfires, and then just with general low interest rates and high demand for housing and home improvement, we could see an unseasonably late continued strength in flatbeds as we head into the fall. So with that, I'm going to go to our DAT IQ question of the week, and it's actually a question from yours truly that I had that I was really excited to get to talk about, given that it's National Truck Driver Appreciation Week. So I'm going to paraphrase the question a bit, but this one was largely for Dean, and it speaks to what can we across the industry, as shippers, carriers, brokers, software companies serving the trucking industry, what can we do to make truck drivers' lives a little bit better all year round, not just during Truck Driver Appreciation Week?
It's a great question, Ken. I've done a couple of million miles as a driver, and I can say to you that it's one of the hardest jobs I've ever done in my life. The driving part's really easy. I could teach anybody how to drive a truck or to steer a truck. It's really quite easy. The hardest part is dealing with everything else that goes on around you, and that includes traffic, weather, dock delays, frustrating driver managers, company policies, getting harassed on the scales by, or getting pulled over by troopers unnecessarily. And I've had all of those things happen to me. So I would say that, the hardest part of a driver's life is the non-driving piece. And that's what leads to a lot of frustration. It leads to a lot of mental anguish, a lot of depression, a lot of frustration and anger. And drivers tend to have this very tough exterior that they're kind of known for globally. But I can say that underneath that tough exterior, they're just like you and I. And they suffer from all the same sorts of challenges that we all do. But I think for drivers, it's even more pronounced, and it's got a lot to do with the time of day they work and the hours they work. Think about, what occupation do you know where the average workday is 14 hours, double the average? Like, their workday is 14 hours. That's the minimum. So what that leads to is incredible disruption to lifestyle, home life balance, sleep in particular. And drivers, if you think about just sleep, we all behave like 2-year-olds without sleep. Right, that's kind of normally how the brain works. And for drivers, it's even more pronounced because they're driving at night, they're unloading early in the morning, they're picking up late into the evening. Their whole body clock is thrown out of whack. And why I mention that is because one of the things that drivers suffer from a lot is depression and mental health issues. They have a lot of windscreen time where they sit, think about things. So a lot of those small frustrations that you and I can cope with fairly easily become really challenging for drivers to actually deal with every day. And I would just say to anybody, Driver Appreciation Week, a wave goes a long way. Just wait, a simple wave as you drive past, just a note of recognition. But I think for driver managers and brokers who are connecting with drivers every single day, I would take time out just to connect with them. And when I say connect, I know that everybody's busy talking on the phones. They've got red lights flashing with calls waiting. They're trying to deal with multiple loads at the same time. I would just encourage people this week and all the time, if you can, just take time out and say, how are you going? How are you really going? How's your truck going? Make an effort to make a personal connection, because that will make the world of difference, because there's nothing worse than just being treated like a number and being pushed on and off phone calls and through the whole dispatch process. Drivers would love that recognition, and I think it's a great way to connect with them, in particular when they're sitting around waiting on loading docks. That's probably the most frustrating time. So anything our brokers and carriers and fleet managers can do to connect with drivers, particularly when they're waiting around, I think would be a really good thing to start doing this week if they're not already doing it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I remember it when I was at FedEx, Driver Appreciation Week, we'd have as many drivers as we could come through. And my last year there, we had barbecue and live entertainment and kind of allowing or facilitating even corporate folks to come down and talk to the drivers. And as a pricing person, that was always interesting to pick their brain and say, like, what are you seeing kind of like as a ground truth when it comes to prices? Because they're all talking. I mean, right. It was amazing how quick news would get out, especially we were a small division of a large company. The custom critical news would spread like wildfire through the TAs and the pilots and flying J's across the country. It was just amazing how that stuff.
Well, Ken, just think about drivers' life. They socially distance for a living. The whole notion of keeping apart from people is kind of part of the occupation. They do that as a matter of course. But because you spend so much time on your own, when you get the opportunity to talk to someone, it really needs to be a good conversation. And unfortunately, what we do on the other side of the driving, situation is we tend not to give them that same amount of time that they need because we've got lots of stuff to do. So drivers just crave any opportunity where they can have a good conversation with someone. You've got to be pretty skilled at having conversations because I can say from a psychological perspective, the longer you spend behind the windscreen and the wheel, that you lose your ability to communicate and put words together. I know this might sound crazy, but the more tired you get and the longer you're on the road, the less ability you have to string together coherent sentences. As some might say, that's me all the time. But I could say when you become a driver, when I would drive and do long distances in Australia and even here, you get home at the end of the work week and you can barely speak. And it's really, really frustrating. You know you want to talk, but you just can't get the words out because you've been on your own and isolated for so long. And that's why I think it's important that we just, as an industry, take time to really make an effort to connect with drivers this week in particular.
Yeah, I mean, the last point that I had was we show these charts, right, these up and down roller coaster charts, and we realize that, or sometimes we don't realize intuitively that a lot of the smaller fleets, especially independent owner operators, that truck payment is coming every other week or once a month, whether rates are $1.30 a mile or $2.50 a mile or $10 a mile, right, on a given lane. Yeah. And a lot of those smaller fleets, even some larger fleets, don't have the option of kind of riding out the storm, parking the truck and riding out the storm because the payment, right. Payments keep coming.
And it's been part of the challenge they've had with the COVID pandemic is the need to, or the requirement to keep an even greater distance away from especially loading docks and shippers. And that's made it particularly hard because we've already seen lots of examples where facilities at shippers had been closed down, rest areas had been closed down. And so drivers already have this limited access to things that they need just for, basic daily, sort of functioning as they go about their just normal life. So, dock time's the other thing. I think the biggest frustration drivers will tell you about today is waiting. It's this hurry up and wait mentality. There's probably nothing more frustrating as a driver than having to make an appointment at 3 a.m. only to be told they're not ready for you. A friend of mine had a 11 p.m. appointment last Friday night. They were told they couldn't accept the truck, so he's now finally unloaded yesterday evening. So it was his second week in a row where he had 3 days under a load because the shipper couldn't take them. So the whole idea of hurry up and wait is a really big deal. But I would say to our broker network and shippers in particular, be more diligent about appointment times and make sure you set the expectations correctly, because if you don't, it leads to a lot of frustration on the driver part. And that's a big part of why drivers struggle to stay in this industry. They struggle to turn it from a job into a career because of that frustration and all of the things they have to deal with outside of the driving task.
Awesome. Well, really good stuff as always, Dean. I'm looking forward to all the stuff you're going to be able to contribute with your perspective over the coming year, and just based on all the stuff you've contributed already in your short tenure with DAT. So I'm going to wrap us up this week. We've made it 26 minutes at this point, and I think that's 26 minutes more than some of us were expecting, given our technical and I want to say like ecological problems that we're having. So a couple housekeeping items. You can find the non-technical difficulty market update that Dean puts together every week in written form, which is chock full of excellent information at dat.com/market update. If you have any questions, since we really don't have time or the ability to take questions here today, askiq@dat.com. Please like and subscribe to the video. It's the best way to get notified of live content and any recorded content that we do. And speaking of recorded content, we will be putting this recording out on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all of our channels at some point today or later this week. So again, I want to thank Dean and Ned for joining me this week. Thank you guys for watching. And again, from me and everyone at DAT, a big thank you and tons of appreciation to the truck drivers that keep this economy in the country rolling week in and week out. So thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you.